Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel, about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and key countries and regions of the world with whom India has ties. Viewers, in this episode, we are looking at India's western neighbor, Pakistan. Why is Pakistan mired perpetually in deep crisis, social, economic, political, and what is the impact of this troubled, failing, or failed state on its neighborhood and on India in particular? What can be done about this problem case that has been a major issue in South Asia? These are the themes that we're going to be discussing in this episode. And to go through this Pakistan journey, I have with me a very special guest joining me in the studio. Let me welcome Ambassador Ajay Bisaria.
Namaskar, great to be here.
Ambassador Bisaria was India's High Commissioner to Pakistan. He has served in the Indian Foreign Service with great distinction for more than 3 decades, and has also served as our envoy to Canada, to Poland, to Lithuania. He has served both in bilateral and multilateral settings for India, and he is the author of this very important new book that's doing the rounds. It's called Anger Management. This is a comprehensive history and chronicle of the diplomatic relations between India and Pakistan since inception in 1947 until today. Ambassador, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you, great to be here, great to be on your show.
Ambassador, crisis and Pakistan seem to be like inseparable twins. We have always had this notion that this country was, from conception, incomplete and inadequate, and you have raised that in your book. Issues of identity and its very standing and bearing in the world has been questioned repeatedly. And today, once again, we find that Pakistan is on the edge and is looking like it's teetering. So, if you were to look at the whole history and make a broader generalization to start with, deep economic malaise, huge social fragmentation, and massive governance crisis with weak state and society that is at odds with many other parts of the polity. This kind of country has been described as a failed or a failing state, and we see many manifestations of it from here in India. And the world also seems to be treating increasingly Pakistan as a problem case. So, if you were to look back at the country where you have served, with whom we are very intimate, what do you think is the fundamental weakness of this country, and why is it manifesting itself so sharply and openly at the present juncture?
I think what Pakistan is facing today is a polycrisis, which is a more severe challenge than any of the ones it has faced in the past. And I would argue that from August 2021, roughly, when the US withdrew its troops from Afghanistan, Pakistan is going through a multi-faceted crisis, which is a crisis in its polity, because of the challenge of taking Imran Khan and then dumping him in a hybrid regime. It is a challenge to the army, which is weakened in multiple ways by the kind of challenge it faced on the streets of Pakistan on the 9th of May, and again on the 8th of February when it went through elections where people voted a certain way and then it was taken, the vote was stolen and given to another regime. But most importantly, the challenge is of the economic crisis. This is all the economic miscalculations and mistakes of the past coming home to roost together. So I would say that with the security challenge, particularly from Pakistan's west, from the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and the economic challenge and the political dysfunction, Pakistan is a very dysfunctional state. It is perhaps not a failed state, but certainly a dysfunctional state.
And Ambassador, talking of the dysfunctional state, what is it that they have not been able to fix? I mean, everybody knows the ailment, and probably everybody knows that the reform or the deep structural change that is required. But then it keeps going around in loops, this military dominance and then the exploitation and the monopoly over the economy. You speak in this book about the elite capture, which is a World Bank term for the kind of complete misappropriation of the public resources by this dominant military. So and there is a blame game that goes around, and they are also quite self-critical, the Pakistanis. But then, end of the day, it looks like we are seeing the same movie again and again. They're not able to really overcome this and make some drastic change for the better. I mean, foreign policy, and we'll come to that, they have been as the so-called revisionist state. But when it comes to fixing their own internal mess, there has been no revision. I mean, it looks like the same stories is continuing. It's like a doom loop, isn't it? So why have these important stakeholders in that country not been able to rise to the occasion or form maybe coalitions to be able to change the fundamental dynamic there?
Yes, I think the fundamental problem is that the Pakistan army, which plays an outsized role in its polity and its economy, sees itself as the solution, whereas it is the problem. And the whole issue that we face now is that the army itself is unwilling to restructure itself and help restructure the economy, which is really critical to restructuring Pakistan. So there seems to be a consensus even within Pakistan amongst economists and others that what you need to get to is perhaps deep structural reforms of the kind that India undertook in the 1990s, for instance, when it was at the IMF. But Pakistan is a repeat customer of the IMF, going for its 24th IMF bailout. And you can't run a country on debt all the time. So I think the central problem is that the absence of reform all through its history, whether it was land reforms in the 50s that India undertook, Pakistan failed to do it. The kind of economic reforms India undertook in the 90s, Pakistan failed to do it. So what Pakistan needs perhaps is 10 years of serious structural reforms before it could become a normal country. And that difficult path, it mostly refuses to take.
Yeah, it's a difficult path to change, especially where there is elite capture and domination of a small class of aristocrats and military generals. But that is Pakistan for you. Viewers, I have a small video clip of the 2024 general elections in Pakistan, the outcome, the controversy, and the fears about the stolen election, the lack of legitimacy of the current dispensation under Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif. Let's just watch this video and continue the discussion.
Pakistan's newly formed parliament elected Shahbaz Sharif on Sunday as prime minister for a second time. This comes 3 weeks after uncertain national elections caused delays in the formation of a coalition government. Sharif had secured 201 votes, a majority, but his victory was controversial. It was met with loud protests from the Sunni Ittihad Council party, backed by jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Lawmakers loyal to Khan banged on their desks and chanted opposition slogans. They alleged Shahbaz came to power through electoral rigging and called for the release of Khan, who was sentenced to 10 years in jail in a case for leaking state secrets. Here's Sitar Gul, a leader from the PTI party founded by Imran Khan.
Shahbaz Sharif cannot deliver to this country because he is not elected by the people of Pakistan. He has stolen the credit of the people of PTI people, and he has stolen the vote of Pakistani people. He cannot deliver. He's been imposed on the public of Pakistan.
On February 8th, the South Asian country voted in an election marked by a mobile internet shutdown, arrests, and violence in its build-up. The unusually delayed results triggered accusations by critics that the vote was rigged. Shahbaz now returns to the role he held until August last year, when Parliament was dissolved ahead of February 8th election and a caretaker government took over.
So viewers, we just watched the total disarray, political dysfunction and disarray in Pakistan, with most of the people unhappy with the current dispensation and the stolen election, as many of the critics call it. I have Ambassador Ajay Bisaria with me, and Ambassador, you have seen the political class of Pakistan very closely. You've interacted with the highest echelons, and you've written your personal impressions. You've also spoken about this phenomenon of Indian diplomats engaging with Pakistani politicians and talking to them in close quarters all the way since independence. This political class has failed the people of Pakistan. There's no doubt about it. But then sometimes there seems like there is a glimmer of hope, and maybe the civilian supremacy may be restored, but then the military ultimately overrides them. So tell our viewers, what is it about the military and its staying power that it's managed to keep the political class under its toe for so long? There are countries like Indonesia or Turkey, which were also known as garrison states, like Pakistan, but they actually underwent reforms where civilian supremacy ultimately was established. So in the case of Pakistan, they just don't seem to be able to move the needle.
I think that's a critical question which Pakistanis are asking themselves. I think the part of the problem is that it is a particularly strong garrison state, and it's embedded in the history of Pakistan. So from the foundational moments, from the time of independence, when Pakistan got 33% of the British Indian Army rather than 16 or 18%, which it should have, proportionate to its population. It tried to invent a threat, and the Pakistan Army has tried to carve a role for itself. Now, the civilians have always tried in this civil-military tension to occupy some more space, but the Pakistan Army succeeds in denying them that space. And the model now is for the civilians to get the help of the Pakistan Army to climb to power, rather than all of the civilians and the judiciary coming together and, for instance, saying that we need to come together to ask the army to get back to the barracks to become a normal state. Instead of that, they deploy the help of the army in coming to power. So when Imran Khan comes on the back of the army establishment as the ladla of the army and comes into power, but when they have a divorce, it's a messy divorce, he goes away, he challenges the army, but the next bunch of civilians is ready to again climb on the shoulders of the army and come to power, which is what the Sharif brothers did this time. So the army, instead of being challenged, is used by the civilians to come to power. And therefore, the challenge is never serious. Apart from that, what the army's business model of controlling the country is that it would it would have control over the judiciary, over the civilians, by simply blackmailing them, by having videos and dossiers about everyone, and by being able to influence their behavior. So both things happen. The civilians themselves are pliant and are willing to toe the line, but the army itself is effectively putting them under the jackboot and blackmailing them and using different means to make their behavior more pliant.
And Ambassador, the security crisis they have, with the insurgencies in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and then across the border in Afghanistan, clearly they seem to be also growing in capacity to debilitate and weaken the state because of the basic weakness of the state in the first place, isn't it? Like they seem to be capitalizing on this kind of state weakness and carving out whole enclaves which are totally lawless and ungoverned. You mentioned in your book, Anger Management, that Imran Khan himself at one time when he was prime minister said we have 40,000 or more so-called lawless elements out there with heavy weapons. So is that kind of a country which has been, on one hand, they have this notion that, we have a common unity around Islam and that this is our identity and this is what sets us apart from India. But they have, within this so-called Islamic polity, there's so many divisions, like very, very fractious. So tell our audience about the security crisis they're facing, and the multiple challenges.
I think what it boils down to is a number of strategic errors in managing security that Pakistan's army particularly made. I think Pakistan's army fundamentally gave up its monopoly on force the moment it read what Hillary Clinton called the snakes in the backyard. So you would use Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hizbul Mujahideen, and you would hope that creating these militant tanzeems would be a great strategic move for you to challenge your neighbors in different ways. But guess what? That wouldn't always happen. The neighbors would fight back, and the same radical forces and the same tanzeems that they created now turned on the Pakistan army. And this is exactly what we are seeing on the western frontier for Pakistan. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has become a severe challenge, which has taken the relationship with Afghanistan to a new low. Pakistan was hoping with the advent of the Taliban, it would have a new equation, strategic equation, giving it strategic depth in the West after the Taliban took over. But on the other hand, they have created an enemy number one. So they treat Afghanistan as the enemy number two, enemy number one, perhaps Iran with the exchanges that they had as another enemy, and India had the luxury of falling in the charts of Pakistan's list of enemies. So I think the fundamental security problem that Pakistan faces is a result of the errors of the security establishment in creating, giving up the monopoly of power with the state and accepting militant organizations which would challenge not just the neighbors, but the Pakistan army itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a country where, the state doesn't even have a full monopoly over violence, and that's a cause for complete fragmentation and all kinds of radical elements running amok. This has also been called jihad culture. You've seen that in Pakistan, totally out of control, and now the establishment doesn't even know what is happening. Many times it's not necessarily scripted by them, but it's just the outcome, as Ambassador Bisaria is saying, of a lot of follies, major follies made by the military establishment. Viewers, coming to India now, we have this failing or dysfunctional state on our western border, and we will have to deal with it willy-nilly because we can't choose geography, and it's right next door. We have a long border with them, and we have disputes with them, territorial disputes. And so I'd like you to hear something that our External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramanian Jaishankar and our Defense Minister Rajnath Singh recently said about Pakistan and its weakness, and the question of the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which remains in play and which India claims to be its sovereign territory. Let's just listen to our Foreign Minister and Defense Minister on this matter and continue the discussion.
The issue of POK, I want to be clear. There is a national position. It's not a party position. The Parliament of India has taken a united stand. Every political party of this country supported that stand. So it is a stand that we will never accept that POK is not part of India. So that is a united stand. It remains our stand.
भाइयों, पीओके हमारा था, पीओके हमारा है, पीओके हमारा रहेगा। आप चिंता मत करो, भारत की ताकत बढ़ रही है। भारत का डेवलपमेंट जितनी तेजी के साथ हो रहा है, भारत की प्रतिष्ठा अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जगत में जिस तरीके से बढ़ रही है, भारत की अर्थव्यवस्था जितनी तेजी से आगे बढ़ रही है, अब पीओके के हमारे भाई बहन स्वयं ही मांग करेंगे कि हम भारत के साथ रहना चाहते हैं।
So viewers, India's defense minister saying that the economic plight and the discrimination that people in Pakistan occupied Kashmir are facing are so severe, and the friction within POK, as we call it, is quite deep, that they may one day want to voluntarily rejoin India. Coming back to Ambassador Bisaria, weakness. We have already spoke about Pakistan as a weak state. The GDP of just $340 billion. It's not even 1/10 the size of India, right? I mean, we have left them so far behind. And in your book, you make a very interesting point that if you look at the history of India-Pakistan relations, a lot of it is determined by their perception, the Pakistani establishment's perception of the relative strength or weakness vis-a-vis India. Major wars, major misadventures, and all these have been undertaken on the mistaken belief that they had the upper hand, or they had parity, or maybe even superiority over India. Now, it's quite obvious, I mean, the writing is on the wall. They cannot catch up with India without reforms, those deep structural changes that we spoke about. That's not looking like anything on the horizon for them. and India is growing so fast and is projected to, ultimately equal China and the United States, become a great power in the world. And Pakistan cannot even possibly at most be called a sub-regional power or something like that. So in that context, this adversarial relationship, the wars, the terrorism, the cross-border terrorism they have sponsored, their claims, maximalist claims over Kashmir and all these, what do you think is going to happen, medium to long term, given their quote-unquote backwardness vis-a-vis India? Do you think, having seen them from close quarters, will they ultimately become rational and say, okay, we cannot compete with them and this game is over, let us tone down our maximalist claims, let's live in peace with India and stop all this the revenge of partition, the unfinished business of partition, let's just get rid of all those and start afresh? Do you foresee any such a positive change, or do you think they will keep trying to needle and play this game of trying to bleed India with 1,000 cuts, which is General Ziaul Haq's famous doctrine?
That's $1 million question, and that's the key question here. If Pakistan were to behave completely rationally, and you see some impulses within Pakistan, some conversations that happen within Pakistan, which say that the power differential between the countries has become so wide that it doesn't make sense for Pakistan to challenge India. It makes sense for Pakistan to accept this differential and make peace with India, and not be such a revisionist power, but perhaps try to be accepting of the status quo. Apart from that, there is a recognition that Pakistan's own economy is collapsing. Rather than growing at a slower pace, it is in fact collapsing. And what that means is that Pakistan does talk about a pivot to geoeconomics from geopolitics. And that recognizes the fact that the geopolitical rents have dried up, which means the political godfathers that Pakistan had globally are seeing less and less value in the geostrategic location of Pakistan. So for all those reasons, the rational thing to do would be to have a modus vivendi with India, which says that let's focus on geoeconomics, let us calm the borders, let us trade, let us move forward, with a guarantee that this will happen in the absence of violence or terrorism. So the question is whether Pakistan will choose that rational route to try and make peace with India, or still want to experiment with revisionism at considerable risk of destabilizing the region and destabilizing its own economy. So I think that is what leadership Pakistan would need to move in that direction, and that is the kind of diplomacy it would need. And in fact, after elections in both countries which have taken place by coincidence this year, there is some reason for cautious optimism that Pakistan would take the more sensible route rather than the suicidal route.
Last word, Ambassador, in anger management, you have spoken about a spell before 2019 when you yourself sensed from the Pakistani military establishment that they are going to turn a new leaf and that they are going to crack down on this, swarming, this massive problem they have of this jihad culture and this terrorists running amok. And you said that from the Indian side there was some relative optimism that maybe they're going to finally, there's going to be a change in heart and they've seen the reality. But then it went back. So, and the history shows, you've shown in the book, there are many points at which there was some optimism about India-Pakistan rapprochement or peace process and dialogue and all these things. But then they keep getting scuttled. So now going forward, it's hard to gaze at the crystal ball. But do you think there's something we should be also doing to encourage them to go down that path? You also spoke about the role of global powers. So where does all that come in to try and moderate their position in their own best interests, which is to settle these disputes with India and to carry on with the people to people and the trade and the normalcy that we neighbors should have, So do you think there's something that India and external powers should be doing to move them in a positive direction? Can we do that?
Well, that would be the very optimistic scenario. Pakistan does have these scattered impulses for getting to normalcy. In fact, at one point, coincidentally, Minister Jaishankar said that we would like to see a normal Pakistan, and the Pakistan Army Chief said exactly the same thing. We want to become a normal country. So there is an impulse to be normal. But far too often, the default position of becoming abnormal is something that Pakistan goes into, periodically. So after the Pulwama Balakot episodes, as you're mentioning, we did see signs that there was a conversation around reining in the militant organizations. They were giving Pakistan a bad name. Its international reputation was mud. They wanted to change it. Pivot to geoeconomics, better relations with neighbors, containing the militant organizations. All this was talked about as part of the Bajwa doctrine, as the military doctrine. But the moment Article 370 happened, they lost the plot again and seemed to be, looking for more militant solutions. So I think the instincts are there. In some shape or form, India should encourage those instincts for Pakistan to become a normal country. And I advocate an engagement in an atmosphere free of violence and terror with Pakistan's army for us to, make the point that if Pakistan moved in that direction, India could be a good partner. Absent terrorism, India could be a good partner.
So viewers, the sum of our discussion today is that India-Pakistan relationship can be non-adversarial provided Pakistan realizes the folly of the past and turns around and becomes a normal country, becomes a friendly country that is not out to define its identity simply by attacking India or by challenging India, but rather to find its own peace internally, better governance internally, and also rethink its basic identity as a country that was born simply to be the antithesis of India. Rather, it should find some kind of a self-assured identity of its own. All these and much more are contained in this important book by Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, Anger Management. Do read it and reflect on the hits and misses of the last 75 plus years of this relationship. But the important point for all of us to note is that Pakistan is struggling and it's in a very, very dire straits. And there's only so much that the international community can do about it. What is more important is they look to reform and for some kind of a rebirth. Otherwise, the calamity after calamity, crisis after crisis, it's going to continue, and it's not good for the region. So let me thank Ambassador Ajay Bisaria for sharing valuable insights, first-hand insights. Congratulations for this book. I see it's doing very well, and I hope people will reflect on all your important points in this.
Thank you very much. That's the purpose of the book, to encourage conversation.
Viewers, do read Anger Management and do think about India's western neighbor. Failed, failing, dysfunctional, whatever you want to call it, we cannot ignore it. We have to deal with it, and we would like it to come back on track and become a normal country. That's the message to our neighbors. We are ready for peace, provided there is no terrorism. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.